I did not understand the biases that were in court. We all know that there's bias. We all experienced different variations of it in our lives. I expect that, sadly, but not what I actually saw. It was at a level when I started that was, in my opinion, very unfair. And I represented really good people, really good fathers. And it was so difficult when I started to get a father to be treated equally.
Let's go, let's go, let's grow, let's grow, let's get it, let's get it, let's get it, let's get it, let's go, let's go, let's grow, let's grow, let's get it, let's get it, let's get it, let's get it, let's go, let's go, let's get it.
What's going on, everybody? I am your boy, Carlos B. Spencer, here on Black Dad Unfiltered, always here with my guy.
Yo, it's your boy, Coach Rod. Carlos, I'm excited. We get together every time to try and change the narrative on Black men, Black fathers, and speak to fathers just in general. We're never limited, but our work is good, right? We're trying to change this story and try and change this narrative. So what do we have on deck?
Yeah, man, we have a great conversation today, man, that I think is going to go in a direction that we desire for it to go, because it's a space that we don't hear about a lot, especially on platforms like the one that we have, speaking about Black fathers. And we have someone who's in the profession in this field. So it's not just you and I talking, right? It's not just you and I giving our advice. Of course, we know we have great conversations, going to great dialogue, and we enjoy that. People enjoy that as well. But we always want to bring in different specialists who specialize in these areas, who can give us an even greater depth of information. So we're talking about fathers' legal rights. Fathers' legal rights when it comes to children. Did you say ouch? Fathers' legal rights, man. And maybe we'll dive into a little bit. Myself, had a 20+ year marriage, went through a divorce, going through some of those things right now, man. And it's not as easy at times, right?
Sure.
But we're going to have a guest comes on at this time. And actually, you have some information that you can read about them and share with our listeners and those who are watching in. And we'll bring Randy on in with us, and we'll kind of get into this conversation.
So yeah, I'm really excited again, and part of our goal is to educate. So we were fortunate enough to get Randy Karmel of Randy L. Karmel PLLC, practicing attorney since 1991, licensed to practice bar law in New York, New Jersey, District of Columbia, Maryland. When she comes on board, she'll tell you a little bit about herself, but the current areas she practices is matrimonial and family law, mediation and litigation. She's certified to present children in the first department. She's a prior member of the second department panel, which I don't know what that means, but I'm sure she'll let us know what it means.
Right.
She's certified to represent clients in domestic violence matters in the integrated domestic violence court, et cetera, et cetera. And she's been on both sides of this experience. So again, let's just bring Randy in. Let's start the conversation. Randy, welcome.
Welcome.
So much for having me. This is such an important topic. So I am thrilled to be here. And Coach Rod, I want to say you said the exact expression that I love, change the narrative. So I'm really happy to see if we can talk about that and change the narrative.
You know what? We're just gonna jump right in, Los. I'm sorry.
No, you ain't got to be sorry, because I want to hear about it. While I'm hearing the bio, I'm like, man, I could have used some of this information like about a year or two ago. But then I also said, while you were reading that information, I'm grateful that our listeners and our fathers will be able to chime in, because I think we see a lot of fathers who tend to give up because they don't know the rights that they have, or it's an uphill battle. You hear this term, and I'll throw it right back to you, Coach Rod, to go ahead and jump in it. You've heard this term before. Well, why didn't he fight harder for the custody of his children? Or why didn't he fight harder for time with his children? And then you hear the phrase that came back that said, well, why did he have to fight in the first place? So I'm intrigued, and I'm waiting to hear some great information.
So I'm going to tee Randy up, because we had a conversation prior to this. And the one thing she said that struck with me, and I was like, this is going to be great. She says the first things fathers have to do when they're faced with this when they get to the legal matters, right, of custody, is they have to change the narrative in court. And I said, wow, I didn't think about that. So Randy, let's start there. What do you mean by, fathers have to, well, first tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then let's jump into what do you mean by changing the narrative?
So, my background, after graduating law school, I was a prosecutor, and that was 5 years. And part of it was the Domestic Violence Bureau and, major narcotics. I did trials. It was wonderful. And then I was a criminal defense attorney for a while. So I got to hear the other side of things, which I think if anybody's ever a prosecutor, they need to do criminal defense. If they're ever a criminal defense attorney, they need to be on the other side, because the stories are not always accurate, right? You have to hear the side. So that was just great. I worked in private practice. I was part of worked at the Department of Investigation. I was Deputy Inspector General, did all of that, and then finally said, I'm opening up my practice. Well, when I opened up my practice, that's when I actually did some criminal defense. And then I started to learn family law and got into matrimonial. And I realized that this was something that mattered in my world. For whatever reason, I sort of took a liking to trying to help people that were not in a good situation. And a lot of times not because it was their fault. And I saw that very much in custody cases with fathers. I did not understand, I think innately, I did not understand the biases that were in court. We all know that there's bias. We all experienced different variations of it in our lives. I expect that, sadly, but not what I actually saw. It was at a level when I started that was, in my opinion, very unfair. And I represented really good people, really good fathers. And it was so difficult when I started to get a father to be treated equally.
Hey, click the like button, click the subscribe, hit some comments, or some information or some questions that you might have. Click the notifications bell so you can be notified every time we have some new content that drops. Let's go, let's grow, let's get it.
In general, and we won't even go into, we will, but I'm going to start general rather than, the Black Dad. Okay. And because there's other stereotypes, just like with women, there's certain stereotypes. It's there, but it was palpable to me. It was, and there were times I represented, honestly, the better parent who happened to be the father. And to be offered things like, well, he can have a Saturday from 10 to 8, and he can have a Wednesday dinner, threw me off. And I honestly, I'll give you a little personal background, just I think because it helps to understand. As a female entering law, there were people who didn't ever think I was the lawyer when I walked into the room. There were people who definitely had stereotypes of what that was to them. And I felt like as a professional, I want to be treated equally as a professional. So why can't the father be treated equally as a parent? Like what I wanted in the business world, why couldn't a man have that in the home? And I felt that there was some analogy there. And it was an uphill battle. I will get to things have changed now. So we'll go to the positive note. But if you heard what I was saying, you can have X, you can have Y. Yeah. What gave one person the right to dole out time to the other parent? What was it? Gender? Was it society? Was it that somebody maybe was the stay-home parent and the other person wasn't? But what was it that in every single case that I had early on, one person was doling out time to the other? And that's when I say, change the narrative. Because
how do you do that? How do you do that?
So, perfect question.
It's easy to say change the narrative, right?
It is so easy. So I'm going to give you what I tell people at consultations who come to me and they ask me, they say, well, the mother has done this. And this is not to criticize mother. That is not who I am, and that is not what I'm doing at all. But there are people, and we're on a podcast where this is the topic. But when somebody says, you can have Wednesday night dinners, or you can have this. Instead of saying, okay, thank you, I really want something else. Can I have, or I want Fridays to Mondays. Why don't you just say, well, you can have Thursday night to that? Why aren't you using the same
Got you.
So I tell people who come for consultations, unless you're the other parent, I don't even want to say spouse, because it's not always a spouse, unless the other parent is going to blow up and there's going to be, I'm getting an order of protection and that whole avenue that you don't want to go, or that whole road. If you can change the narrative from day one that you are an equal parent, that will go a long way. There is no doling out.
I want to pull it apart a little bit, because I want to, I think I understand what you're saying, but I want to make sure I'm not assuming. From what I'm hearing you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there have been mothers who kind of give out or dictate what the schedule is going to be. You can have a Wednesday, you can have a Saturday. And are you saying that the conversation should be more so balanced, that fathers should be able to say, okay, I'll take Wednesday and Thursday, and you can have Friday, Saturday, and Saturday? Is that what you're saying there?
Yes, it's a balanced conversation. And when I started, there was really very little balance. It is now, and it's better now. But there are people who will probably don't even realize that that's how they should be speaking, because there are people, and I will say men, fathers, who believe that that's just what's going to happen in court anyway. So she might well do that. And I want to make this very clear. I'm not criticizing mothers. I'm not criticizing women. What I'm saying is there is a feeling sometimes that she's the one who's going to get custody, or that she's the one. And I don't always think it's bad intent. I really don't. But we fall into categories and roles sometimes that we don't want to be. You know, when they tell you that when you go back to your childhood home, you sit in the same chair you did when you were 5. We go into patterns. You have to break this pattern. You have to break the pattern.
So what you're saying, and I get it now, it's change the narrative, change your position in the story yourself. Be part of the author of the story, right? Just don't be a passenger. That is great. And so you talked a lot about we fall into default patterns. And again, I had a very healthy divorce from my kid's mother. We're good. It was very healthy. We put the best interests of the kids at first, right? And we're not going to lie here and say that there isn't bias, or there wasn't bias in the courts. And I'm going to call it to his situation. There's this term that I heard, best interest of the kid, right? Best interest of the kid, but historically, mothers predominantly will get custody of the children, right? Let's share some light on this for me. Like, how do we determine what's best? I know what the law says, but what's the actual practicality of this?
So you're very, you're dependent on the judge if you're in front of a judge. And that's the tough thing is, you know, I always say that there's a difference between criminal law and family law. In criminal law, the DA has to prove elements. It's very clear. You have to prove certain elements beyond a reasonable doubt of a crime. In matrimonial or family, there's factors a court can consider. So one judge can consider something much more important than another judge. And that's why going to court for custody is not always the way to go if you can solve it yourself. But the best interest of the child, because that's the standard, is there are factors that a judge will consider. Domestic violence, the court must consider. Everything else, the court may consider. So it's age, if somebody has, you know, an addiction problem, it's, you know, their, I don't want to say intelligence level, but their capacity to parent. One of the biggest factors is fostering a relationship. So as I said, years ago when it used to be, and you said it best, years ago when it used to be that the mothers normally thought that they were going to have custody, so they were, you know, doling out the time. They also had that responsibility and obligation to foster the relationship, not to alienate. And that's really important in custody cases, really important. I can't stress that enough. So a judge will decide, and how people act. It's very important. I'll just give a quick example. Imagine somebody says, I want to take, our child to my nephew's wedding. And another parent says, absolutely not. For no reason. That's not going to fare well in court. But if there was a real reason, somebody was going to travel to a country where it's very dangerous, well, that would be reasonable to say, you know what, I'm going to withhold consent, but it's a reasonable, withholding.
Gotcha.
So the court looks at decisions that parents make, how they communicate with each other. And that's important.
Can I say this though? Because it seems like, and I'll say I'm a father who went through this as well, right? I did also. And you pick this up from other fathers that you're around, that kind of what you alluded to at the very beginning of the conversation when you started, that fathers just feel like automatically that the mother's going to get the rights to decide and dictate everything. I won't go into the depths of it because I just don't believe in dragging the mother of my children that far in. But I will say that that's how it went in our case. Her side, her lawyers got to decide. And I had to, on the back end, okay, do I agree with this? Do I not agree with this? Am I okay with this? Am I okay with the terms that they laid out before me? Pretty much. And we're married over 20 years. Our children were in the house with both of us. And so I was taken aback at a lot of the process because I'm like, okay, why does she get to dictate this? Why does she get to dictate that? And a lot of our divorce went on so long just because she pretty much was holding on to that position. And so now I'm finding that I'm probably going to have to actually go back to court to get some things amended, because there are things I am learning about now. There are things I am discovering. And I had brothers and other people who came to my aid and were like, pretty much, they're your children as well. You're the father also. Like, you're the father, she's the mother. But I think for the most part, most men, and I think I'm safe in saying that, do feel exactly that way. They get to dictate what you're going to do. You get to agree or not agree. And if you disagree, it's pretty much going to go back into her court anyway. That's how it feels.
So that's great. And thank you for sharing that. It's not necessarily that way anymore. And that's the positive part that I want to convey. First of all, I very much understand exactly what you're saying. And as I said earlier, it's not always bad intent. It's sometimes you fall back into, well, I've been doing X, I've been doing Y. Of course, I'm going to be making the decisions. And it's not always ill intent that somebody has to dictate the terms. But things are very different now. And I'll tell you the one thing that I still think is a problem in the courts, because I think it's important to disclose at least how I feel, and I'm there quite a bit. Fathers are getting 50% of the time now. And it's not that difficult anymore. When I started, it was an uphill battle. It is no longer an uphill battle. I can say that a man walking into court, a father walking in and saying, I want equal time, as long as they have a reason, just like the mother needs a reason, right? As long as both have reasons why this schedule will work. It's seen with no bias, in my opinion, anymore. It is seen as much more standard, but it took a lot of years to get to a point where it has become standard. This is the one little caveat that I found, at least I can say in what I've seen. A father who says, I want 50-50, nobody is shocked at that anymore. We tell all of our clients, despite what you're doing now, don't be shocked if when we get a proposal, it says we want equal parenting time. And some people are like, wow, I would have never expected that. And a week later, we get a proposal and it's just that.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon. But what I do find is that when a father says, I want primary residential custody, meaning I want more than 50%, sometimes that's seen as really. It's as if there's still people out there, and I'm not saying the judiciary, but there are still people out there who think, well, you got 50-50, what more can you want? And it's like, really? Well, maybe they are the parent that really it's in the best interest of this particular child to be with this particular parent because of special needs or because they're seriously just there more. So it's not uncommon, but it's, and we're getting there, and we're getting to a much better place. The courts are much more open. And as a matter of fact, I was before a judge who, when we walked in on a custody case, one of the first things she said is, I just want to let everybody know, unless there's, mental illness or some reason, I see no reason why we don't start at 50-50 and then tell me why it shouldn't be rather than the way it used to be. So things are definitely changing.
So I want to ask this, if that's all right, Rod.
Go ahead.
It's in the space of what you were saying. Like, what are the reasons that, because I think you kind of said that there has to be a reason when the father say, I want 50-50, or I'm strongly assuming that if the father wants more than 50% of the time, there has to be a reason as well. And speaking of father's rights, I just want to hear what some of those reasons could be, whether that be a reason that the father needs to say, I'm the more stable parent, or the reason saying that if we split it 50-50, I have a stable home, she has a stable home. Like, what are the reasons that fathers can come up with or have to be able to get that type of custody?
So first of all, I want to make it clear, it's not just the father who has to give reasons. Both parents have to give reasons. Like, why is this? If you can't think of a reason why you shouldn't have 50-50, then why don't you have 50-50? Right? So if you can't think of, and I did have a judge one time say, when I asked for 50-50 for my client, I remember the judge, and I remember he said, Ms. Karmel asked me a question, because I did on the record. I felt a little stronger that day than other days. And I said, Your Honor, can you tell me why my client shouldn't have it? We don't ask questions like that of the judge, but for whatever reason, I felt like I could. And I did.
Now, I don't want to cut you off. When you asked him that, was he saying that he was not going to give it, or you just asked that outright?
He said he doesn't, at that point, he said he doesn't really believe, this was many years ago, not many, but
right.
years ago.
Got it.
He really doesn't like 50-50. He thinks there should be like a base home. And I then went into my question, and it wasn't really for him to answer. It was more rhetorical. But he thought about it. This was a phenomenal judge, and he thought about it. And he said, I am going to grant Ms. Karmel's client's request because I can't think of a reason why not.
Yeah.
And
this was a male client that you had.
This was the father that I had,
okay.
Yes. And the child was a little older. It wasn't an infant, but, this was, to me, it was like, okay, well, there we go. Something just happened in this courtroom. And that was very good. So both parents, like when somebody says, I don't think 50-50 will work. Okay, why? Or I think this schedule is better than that schedule. And I'm just going to say like a 50-50 schedule. Some parents say, I want a week on, a week off. Other people say, oh no, I want it broken down. Why? So the only real reasons are what's best for the child. It's, stable schedule, something that doesn't change every day back and forth. Not a lot of transitions. A parent who can actually be there, right? Like some parent who doesn't necessarily work at certain, intervals where, they're gone for, a full weekend. Okay, well, then we're going to have to really change the schedule, right? You can't have 50-50 if you're traveling.
I want to ask a somewhat difficult Monday, question. Right? I want to dominate the conversation, right? I got to ask something.
Go ahead.
How about in cases where the children are already primarily with the mother and the father's going back to the courts to possibly get 50-50? And would the courts look at that in the sense of, or the judge of, well, the child has already been primarily with the mother. Why would we do 50-50 now?
That makes the person representing the father, that makes it a little more of an uphill battle. Yeah, that makes a difference who has been the primary caretaker. That is not the only factor, but that is a factor. And also the age of the child matters. When you have a 4-year-old, it's very different than when you have a 12-year-old.
So with that 12-year-old, and I'm not cutting you off, but I want to just give more. With that 12-year-old, does the older child have a voice?
Yes.
Okay.
They have, I love this expression. I can't take credit for it. They have a voice, but not a vote. So I actually represent children as well. Sure. So I speak to children about what they want. And I there are rules about how you can when you can substitute your own judgment for what your client wants, but ultimately we have to tell the court what the child wants. A 4-year-old's opinion is very different than a 12 or 13-year-old child's preference. I shouldn't say opinion, I should say preference. But if a 4-year-old says, I don't want to be with daddy because, and there's real reasons, or I don't want to be with mommy because, and there's real reasons, a parent smokes, or they don't give them the right dinner, or, because the child wants to eat X and all. These are real reasons. So a court would listen maybe to a 4-year-old who says, wait, there's real problems in this particular household. But as a child gets older, they have their own opinions. And the law says that if the judge would like to appoint them a lawyer, that they get a lawyer, and then their voice is heard. And so, yes, as a kid gets older, also, I think that the court puts more weight into what they want.
So I'm going to shift a little bit, right? Because you brought up some interesting points, but I want to take time here to say and re-echo what you're saying. This cause is a famous saying, just because we're for us, we're not against you. So there are plenty of wonderful mothers there. And ideally, we want co-parenting. One of the statistics that I love is I think only 4% go to trial. Most of these custody cases are taken care of without actually ever going to trial. And that's what we promote. But we're speaking to those fathers that have to fight a little bit. So we talked about custody. And this is a weird thing. You can have 50-50 custody, and then there is primary residence, which is a different form, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm painting a weird scenario. So we have 50-50, me and Jane, but the residence is with Jane. Now that means I'm paying child support.
That is correct.
Right? Explain that a little bit for people that get confused about, hold on, we both have custody of this kid, but now I'm paying you child support based on an algorithm or a formula on the state that now also compromises my financial stability. It works against me when I want to. You see what I'm saying? Let's talk about this.
First of all, you said two things which are critical, in my opinion, for this discussion. The first thing is, what is custody? So I don't like the word custody. Okay. I actually say, it's a bad word at times because it has a connotation of there's a dynamic, but they still use the word custody for decision making. So you could have joint custody, meaning joint decision making, but somebody has residential, primary residential. I like to call it parenting time. So when I do a stipulation of settlement, I will say, let's just say you have a couple where it's, a mother and a father, not two mothers or two fathers. I say the mother shall have parenting time on such days. The father shall have parenting time on, such days. Many years ago, it used to say the father shall have visitation on, and then the mother will have all other time. And tell me how that would make you feel marginalized, right? Like you're the visiting parent.
Mm-hmm.
You're the visiting parent. I don't know. I don't love it. Parents don't visit, they parent. So I'm very strong on the words parenting time when I can use it. And the same thing when I have the mothers who don't necessarily have more time. I don't put in a stipulation visitation. I don't like it for anybody. So decision making is one thing, which is still called custody. And then you have, I say parenting time. But let's talk about the effects of child support. You're right. So child support is paid to the parent who has more time with the child. So it does put somebody's financial situation in a different, predicament, in a different level. And it's very tough for people. I can't lie. It is not that I would, but I can't not address. That's actually what I want to say, that the issue of child support, even though it should be separate from the schedule, it's very much blended because, years ago, people used to say, well, what does he want 50-50 or custody because he doesn't want to pay child support. That was my very first case where a judge said that many years ago. Is that the reason why? And of course I took offense to it because it really was not the reason why at all. It had nothing to do with money. Judges don't say that anymore because they really know that the parents who really want to be with the children really want to be with the children. Things have changed. Society has changed. What people think is important has changed. But child support, this is where it gets really difficult. If you have 50-50 residential time with your child, so you have a child, 2 children, and let's just say you have equal time. No parent has more time. Neither parent has more time. The law says that the parent who earns more still has to pay child support to the other parent. Now, you laugh because you know there's something that doesn't seem right, right? A judge could deviate from it, though. A judge can say, you know what? I'm not really granting child support or very little because you both earn about the same thing. But can you imagine, and I'm just throwing out numbers, somebody earns $80,000. It's 50-50 schedule. And somebody earns $90,000. And they have an equal schedule. And then the person who earns $10,000 more has to pay 17% of his or her income for one child to the other. Imagine if it were 2 children, 25%. You think that this person is more enriched than the person who's paying? The person who doesn't have to report that on income tax because child support is not taxable or not tax deductible, that person will have more money because if it's 25% for 2 children, the person will have $80,000 plus $25,000, and the $85,000 will now be below by $25,000. A judge would hopefully see that that is not a good scenario and not equitable and not fair.
And not in the best interest of the kid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But
But
the law allows for that to happen. And that's why, and I'm in court a lot, but you know, if you could avoid it, you should. And you said something, I mean, both of you say things that are so important. You never hear, oh, we had a custody issue. You hear we have a custody battle, right? That's what people say.
Yeah.
And before it became a thing, I remember saying to somebody years ago, when you have a custody case, it's like taking a piece of paper and crumbling it and then trying to make it perfectly flat again. You never will. Your relationship will never be the same if you have to go through for a forensic evaluation and if you have to go through a trial. So yes, most things settle, but when they settle is really important. Do they settle at the beginning because you know, I tell people at consultations sometimes you could put your lawyer's kids through college or your own. How much do you want to spend on fight? And sometimes it's absolutely necessary to fight. Sometimes there's a parent who really is not a good parent or has an addiction problem and hasn't overcome that yet. And I've dealt with parents with addiction problems who actually were able to overcome their addiction. The courts are much more forgiving now than they used to be. So that's another positive thing. Somebody could have an addiction, and many years ago, that would be it. Not now. Now the courts recognize that alcoholism is a disease. It's not something that somebody selects and chooses to do. The courts recognize that there's things like SoberLink that people could blow into, a breathalyzer before they're with a child. There are so many ways to overcome things that if you don't know this from speaking with people or a lawyer, you may go to court thinking this is a done deal. I'm done because, you know, I'm on medication, or I'm done because, you know, I had a DUI in the past, and it's not like that anymore. The courts are much more open-minded than they had been many years ago. There has been great progress.
You get ready to say something.
Yeah, I was going to ask in speaking in terms of a father's rights, and in that example that you gave, if there's 50-50 parenting time, and one person does make more money, and let's say it's slightly more, it's not a whole lot more, does the father have the right to be able to fight for that? Or is it automatic that you
No.
make more money, this is the law, you're going to have to pay it regardless?
Well, if I were the lawyer for the person who made less, I would say, well, this is the law, right? But I also know that the law says a judge could deviate. So yes, you fight for that. You know, we should always think of equity, right? Like, and not equity in terms of ownership, but like what's equal, what's fair.
Sure.
And we hear the expression father's rights. You really don't hear mother's rights that much, because mothers usually, in my opinion, years ago just had, the way it was is they just seemed to have more when it came to, you know, custody and parenting time. But I think that things have changed quite a bit, and nobody is shocked when a father is fighting for anything anymore. Nobody is shocked. It is anticipated. It is expected. If the parent is truly a good parent who, you know, says, you know, I'm doing all these things with my kids just like the other parent, you know. And it's funny because when you and I spoke, well, we did not speak about this particular thing. Maybe we did. I don't remember. But there was, again, this is an expression I did not use, but this is what I used to hear a lot. Litigation makes fathers better fathers. I like to say that litigation makes sometimes parents better parents, right? But that was very much the truth at one time, because a father who used to go out, make a living, work, support the family, didn't have the same time that the mother had, who stayed home with the kids and did what, you know, all the appointments and the medical appointments and the extracurricular activities, which is not easy. Okay. And then all of a sudden they're in court and a father says, wait a minute, now I'm going to come home from work early. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And the mother would say, but you never did that while we were married. What, like, and now you want it. And the answer is, yes, I want it because it's different now. When I used to come home, at least I'd see my kid for an hour or two. Now I don't. So I now have to make that time. And just like a lot of, you know, people who might not have worked because they relied on their spouse, said, you know what, now I'm going to go out and work. So if you work together, you can do this. If you work together for a schedule that works, it's going to happen. But I do think that at times, even though litigation is not always a good thing, people sometimes they're forced to say, I have to change my schedule. And you know what? Now I realize that I have to start taking my kid to the zoo. I have to start doing homework because you are now with the child alone without the other person for part of the time. So you have to do that more than you might have had to do it in the past. So things have to change, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing that whatever makes somebody be a better parent, as long as they are, the kid wins.
So I'm gonna take us, because you brought up a few great things. One, you brought up the addiction as a disease. You brought up the fact that once you start going through litigation, it forces people to have a different perspective. Is what I'm hearing. But I'm going to talk about something unpopular. We know statistically Black men are incarcerated at an alarming rate compared to other ethnic groups. And I want to speak for that population because I don't hear too many people speak for them. What are their legal rights as a parent? If you've been in jail or you are in jail, you know, what are your legal rights as a father? Do you have any?
The answer is yes. And you do have rights. And I guess I would have to say, and I don't know statistics on this, but I think it's an incredibly important topic. I think it depends on what you were incarcerated for.
Logically, yeah.
And how many years have you been there? I mean, I can tell you honestly, there's case law that a parent, and it's old case law, so they use the word visitation. But there's case law where kids had to go to the jail to visit their fathers.
What?
Because, and I was involved in a case many, and I hate to say it because it makes me old, many years ago, where I found one case that went against it because it still has to be in the child's best interest, right? So there is a general feeling that having two parents, if you have two parents, that's in the best interest of a child. Now, if a parent is incarcerated or has an addiction and it's not in the child's best interest to see that parent, okay? Then obviously a court would say, you know what, it's not in the child's best interest, but the incarceration alone is not enough. There is case law that says that, yeah, and I've seen it. I've seen it, rare, but I've seen it in cases. I think that the issue is what the person was incarcerated for, what they did when they got out. You know, there are people who are more that are incredibly successful when they get out of jail. There are people that turn their lives around.
Sure.
I remember the names and I wish I did, but when I started practicing many years ago.
Many moons ago.
Say that with a smile. It was one of my first days in an office. And there were cameras because the person I shared an office space with, they were doing an interview with two people. And these two people were gentlemen who were wrongfully convicted and they got out of jail after several years in jail. And I remember the news cameras were there and I was just in the background listening. And one became a paralegal and one became, you know, I think a college graduate. Now, yes, they were wrongfully convicted, but look what they did with their lives. They became incredibly productive members of society, you know, and I get that they were wrongfully convicted, but wrongfully, or even if you just serve your time because you did something wrong and you serve it, it doesn't mean you come out worse. So I think that the courts are open to it. I think that, you know, again, it depends on what you did, you know, what the person did. And if it was a sex offense, that's
different.
But if you're dealing with something, look, an armed robbery, a weapon, that will have an impact on a judge. But certain things, I don't think it's as important as it used to be, but it's a factor a court will consider.
Fair enough.
What I want to convey here is, other than money, because it's expensive to litigate, if you really believe that you being in that child's life to the extent that you want to be in that child's life, just even though you have a conviction, even though you had been incarcerated or you had an addiction, then you go for it. Because why not? What do you have to lose? If you have nothing now, you have nothing to lose other than, yes, it could be stressful, it could be everything, but if your kid is not really involved in it and your kid doesn't know what's going on, why not try? Because if you have a level-headed jurist who's going to say, you know what, you should be really proud of yourself. You could show.
So Randy, I hate to do this, but I know we're up against the hour.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. And we want to get some, I know Carlos has some questions. We want to get some rapid questions in. So I'll start off because we know this litigation is expensive. So if someone didn't want to go with a court-appointed attorney, do you know of any programs that they can reach out to get an attorney that can probably better represent them in court?
There are programs, you know, the programs that are pro bono, I have not seen them for men. Don't exist. I just have not really seen them for men. I do know that there's a lot of, if you just even Google online fathers' rights, there's a lot of groups and you know, entities that want to help men. But I haven't seen the pro bono, I'm going to stand here in court. I do know that the Women's Bar Association does offer free services for litigation, and to men also, even though it's the Women's Bar Association. They do offer, and it's not custody related, it's actually finances for like 25 hours for free. And that's actually a good thing because it's not gender specific. But a lot of the lawyers who are the pro bono lawyers or the lawyers who are on the panel, a lot of them are very devoted and they're very, very good and they fight very, very hard. And you can also ask for, they're on a sliding scale. So they're less expensive.
Awesome. Los.
Got it. So with the father, is it more difficult when it comes to 100%? And what I mean by that is if the father's going after 100% custody, is it more difficult for a father to go after that than it would be for a mother?
It's difficult for anybody to go for 100% of anything when there's two parents. So if you're saying primary more time, I still think there's an uphill battle, but we see it all the time, and it's not the biggest hurdle. It's you just have to. Why should you be the one? Have you been the one that's home? Maybe you are. Maybe you're the one that's home taking care. Maybe you're the one who's the primary caretaker. But there's no somebody getting 100% anymore. There's really a feeling that both parents should be involved in a child's life, very, very strongly.
One last thing for me, we spoke previously to this, and you had said something that I'm still thinking about. You had said fathers never call the police. Remember that? So I want to end on that. Well, like, what's your tip to dads when if they're experiencing something and calling law enforcement?
I have seen that the men who call the police, I have seen them be the ones to get arrested. And I am not criticizing any particular entity. I'm really talking about my experience with my scene. And one of the first questions I ask my client when I'm being called from jail is, don't talk about the facts. Who called the police? And when it is the other side, okay, that's one thing. When it's you, I feel like we need to have a different talk. And that has happened a lot. So I can't tell people, and I know we're short on time, this is very important. I can't tell somebody if you've been attacked not to call the police. Sure. You have the same right that anybody else to call the police. But what I am saying is, think twice if it's a fight where you're yelling or you're screaming and there's a threat. We're still in a situation where it may not be. The person that may be arrested may not be the person you think that's going to be arrested. Does everything hopefully work out in the end? Sure. But do you want to be sitting in jail for 24 hours until an arraignment? No.
Not at all.
So I'm not telling people who really feel like they should call the police, but when you're calling them into your home in the middle of a fight where one person's going to tell the story and then the other person's going to tell the story, be careful. Be very careful.
And Randy, I was a state trooper for 5 years. I've showed up at a lot of domestic calls, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I do.
There's still stereotypes out there. So
there are still stereotypes, and if the man happens to call and he shows up and the evidence may point the other way, or if the other person is more convincing, again, for us, it's not against you. We're not saying that somebody out there or women out there are doing negative things, but
Sure.
I have seen that. I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you could confirm what I've said, even though it's sad that we both had to witness this, but that is sadly because, again, there's still stereotypes out there, and there are still people who will say, I heard both sides and I'm gonna do what I think is the reasonable arrest to make, and they were wrong. But what you have to go through before it's proven wrong, it's a tough road.
Yeah. So this is my very, very last question for you, and then Los will take us out. When you're thinking about getting a divorce and there are children involved, at what stage should you contact an attorney?
So I like to think that people should contact a lawyer as soon as they know something may be wrong. Because there's a reason why you want a divorce, right? Or there's a reason why the other side wants a divorce. A lawyer who's going to push you, you may think twice about that unless there's a reason, domestic violence or some reason why somebody's saying you need to get out. But to sort of know your rights, like to talk to your audience, let's say, there may be people here who feel like, oh, I didn't know I could like not be laughed at if I fight for 50-50 or primary residential, parenting time. You need to know that. So people who aren't on your podcast or listening to your podcast who don't know that, it's good to know what rights you have. It's good to know the signs that somebody may have already seen a lawyer. So I think we might have spoken about this. Somebody who never does anything for the kids in the morning. All of a sudden, that person is making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches out of the blue. Probably spoke to a lawyer and said, "Who's the primary caretaker? What do you do in the morning?" If your child spoke to a lawyer, what would your child say? Who makes you breakfast? Who makes you dinner? Who makes your lunch? Who tucks you in at night? Who bathes you? So all of a sudden, so sometimes there are signs that somebody else, the other side, spoke to a lawyer. So I do think when there's an issue, then that's a good idea. But I also think there's parent coordinators out there that are excellent. There's mediators. There are people who are trained to help with parenting because people have different parenting styles. It doesn't mean that either one of them is wrong. It's just they may not blend in what they want to do. So there's other people also to go to other than a lawyer who really may be able to help.
All right. Thank you so much, Los.
Man, we appreciate this time. I believe our listeners have been helped. Those who've been watching in and listening in. I know somebody who went through exactly that. I know a gentleman who went through a divorce, and afterwards he found out that his ex was speaking to a lawyer, and in hindsight, he saw some of those things happen that played out in court that all of a sudden started happening before they got to the court process. And then he found out some time later. So I hope our people are listening, and those of you who are listening in and watching, and of somebody who needs to hear this information, please pass it along to them. Send us comments. We thank you for those of you who've been liking, who've been subscribing. Randy, we will ask, like we usually ask everybody, is there a certain place that people can find you? Is there a social media? Is there a website? What's the best place for you to find you?
I don't do much social media, but I do have a website. My email address, I'm happy to give it, which is randy@randykarmel.com. And my name is on the screen, so it's easy to see. If anybody calls me and says that they heard the podcast, I'm happy to run to the phone as fast as possible to pick up the call and to see if I could help in any way. So my email address or my phone number, which is on my website, we're here to help, and we're happy to do it.
We appreciate that. Appreciate the help you're giving again. So you said randy@randykarmel.com?
Yep. Very easy. It's just
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Appreciate the time. We don't take it lightly as well. I've been educated. As I've said to Coach Rod before on Black Dad Unfiltered, I almost do this selfishly at times to gain information that we can gain for ourselves, but also information that we can gain for our listeners. As Rod stated, and I've said it plenty of times before, for me is not against you. So the things that we're stating here is not against anybody. It's not against anybody who's doing a great parenting job, but we want to speak up for fathers who may not be privy to some of this information. And I know from firsthand, someone who's gone through this, that there are a lot of fathers who do not know these rights, or they do not hear this being spoken about enough to be able to say, wow, I never thought about that. So Randy, we appreciate you for causing us to think, bringing some answers, bringing some information. Coach Rod, my guy, man, we're here at Black Dad Unfiltered. Once again, I'm Carlos B. Spencer.
I'm Coach Rod. Once again, let's go, let's grow, let's get it.
All right. Y'all be blessed.
Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Let's go, let's grow, let's get it, let's